Today is April 21st, 2026, and welcome to Furniture Industry News. I'm glad you're here. We're starting to see a clearer picture of where the furniture industry stands as we move deeper into the year. There are a few themes that keep showing up. Sales are still under pressure, but not falling as fast. Costs are starting to climb again, and consumer behavior is shifting in ways that matter for how we plan the rest of the year. Let's start with the latest sales numbers. Furniture and home furnishing sales declined again in March, marking the fifth straight month of year-over-year decreases. But here's the interesting part. The drop wasn't nearly as sharp as what we've seen in previous months. Sales came in at about $11.3 billion, which is just under 1% lower than last year. At the same time, sales were actually up a little more than 2% compared to February. So while we're still technically in a declining environment, the pace of that decline is slowing. That's something to pay attention to. Looking at the first quarter as a whole, total furniture and home furnishing sales are down about 2.8% compared to last year. Not great, but also not a collapse. It's more of a steady pressure than a sudden drop. What makes this stand out even more is what's happening in the rest of retail. Overall retail sales are up year over year, with strong gains in categories like e-commerce, apparel, and electronics. Furniture is one of the few major categories still in the red. There are a couple of small signals that might matter going forward. For example, building materials and garden supply sales are up. That doesn't translate directly into furniture demand, but historically, when people are spending on their homes, furniture tends to follow eventually. Now, shifting over to the manufacturing side, Flexteel just reported its third quarter results, and it gives us a pretty good snapshot of how companies are operating right now. They posted modest growth, with net sales up about 1%. Not a big jump, but growth is growth in this environment. More importantly, they improved profitability significantly. They went from an operating loss last year to a solid operating income this quarter, holding margins just over 7%. That tells you something. Companies that are managing costs well and staying disciplined can still perform, even when demand is uneven.
And uneven is exactly how Flexteel described the current environment. Orders have been choppy, retailers are being more cautious with inventory, and consumers are still dealing with a mix of inflation concerns, higher energy costs, and market volatility. On top of that, cost pressures are starting to build again. Fuel and petrochemical-related inputs are becoming more expensive, partly tied to global events, and that's something we're going to talk more about in a minute. Flexteel expects the near term to stay challenging. They're forecasting flat sales for the next quarter, with margins holding about where they are now. So again, steady, but not accelerating. Now let's talk about one of the biggest issues heading into and out of High Point Market: pricing. Right now, most manufacturers have held the line on pricing during market, but there's a growing expectation across the industry that price increases are coming shortly after. The main driver here is foam. There was a fire at a chemical plant in Texas back in mid-March, and that plant is a key supplier for materials used in foam production. Since then, foam costs have jumped significantly. Some estimates say as much as 30% or more. That's created a ripple effect across upholstery manufacturing, and we're now seeing companies prepare for price adjustments, generally in the range of 3 to 7%. To put that into perspective, a 5% increase on a mid-range sofa could add around $50 at retail. On a sectional, it could be closer to $100. Not massive individually, but it adds up quickly, especially across multiple pieces. Some manufacturers are choosing to implement surcharges instead of permanent price increases, partly because there's still uncertainty around how long these cost pressures will last. Others are planning broader price changes starting in late April and into May. And it's not just foam. Rising oil prices are affecting fabric, packaging materials like styrofoam, and transportation costs. Even imported goods are feeling the pressure, with higher fuel costs impacting production and wages overseas. Interestingly, supply constraints aren't as severe as they could be. Demand has been relatively soft, so even though some suppliers are on allocation, it hasn't yet created major production bottlenecks. Still, the overall tone for manufacturers is cautious. Most are expecting continued cost pressure and potentially more adjustments if things don't stabilize.
Now, on a completely different front, there's a development that could have a meaningful financial impact across retail, including furniture. A new tariff refund process has officially opened, allowing companies to apply for refunds on tariffs that were previously imposed under emergency powers and later ruled invalid. This could be a big deal. Estimates suggest that the government may need to repay around $166 billion in total, including interest. Some of the largest retailers could be eligible for refunds in the billions. The process is being handled through a digital portal, and refunds are expected to be issued within about 60 to 90 days after approval. That said, it's not a clean reset.
New tariffs have already been introduced under a different legal framework, and there's still uncertainty about how trade policy will evolve. So while this could bring some financial relief, it doesn't necessarily remove the broader tariff environment. Now, let's shift to the consumer side, because there are a couple of trends worth paying attention to. First, higher income consumers in second homes. Among households earning $150,000 or more, about 14% own a second home. That number jumps to 24% for households earning over $250,000. These buyers tend to be older, mostly in the older millennial, Gen X, or baby boomer groups, and they're actively furnishing those second homes. The categories they're focused on are pretty consistent. Outdoor furniture is high on the list, along with guest bedroom furniture, home office setups, and living room pieces. For retailers, this is a very specific opportunity. These customers often need multiple rooms furnished at once, and they're usually looking for practical, comfortable products rather than trend-driven items. Finally, let's talk about how consumers are planning to shop this summer. Despite everything we've seen with e-commerce growth, in-store shopping is still very much in play. Only a small percentage of Gen Z and millennials say they plan to shop entirely online. Most are planning to use a mix of online and in-store channels. In fact, nearly 70% of all consumers expect to shop both ways. At the same time, younger consumers are leading spending plans. More than 60% of Gen Z and millennials say they plan to spend more this summer compared to last year.
That creates both opportunity and pressure. Retailers need to have the right inventory in the right place, and they need to be able to adjust quickly as trends shift. Promotions will also matter. With prices still elevated, a large share of consumers say sales and discounts will influence their decisions, especially among millennials and Gen X. So when you step back and look at everything together, the industry is in a bit of a balancing act. Sales declines are slowing, but not reversing. Costs are rising again, particularly in upholstery. Consumers are still spending, but they're more selective. And external factors like tariffs and global events are adding another layer of uncertainty. For most of us in the business, this means staying disciplined, managing inventory carefully, being thoughtful with pricing, and staying close to what the customer actually needs. That's where things stand right now. And if you want to stay on top of what's happening in the furniture industry, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss the next update.